the Battle of Stalingrad. In 1942, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa's Southern Campaign, seeking to capture Stalingrad and cut Soviet supply lines along the Volga River. For months, German forces advanced deep into Soviet territory, convinced of another swift victory. Stalingrad, however, was not just another city. It was a symbol of Soviet resilience and bore the name of Joseph Stalin himself. The battle quickly escalated into a brutal urban war, with snipers hidden in ruined factories and soldiers fighting room by room. The Germans expected a decisive conquest, but what awaited them would shock the entire world. The fighting reached unimaginable levels of intensity. Entire blocks were reduced to rubble by constant bombing, and yet Soviet troops refused to surrender. Soviet commanders, led by General Zhukov, prepared a massive counteroffensive while the Germans grew overconfident. In November 1942, Operation Uranus encircled the German 6th Army, trapping more than 250,000 Axis soldiers inside the devastated city. What had begun as an offensive turned into a nightmare for the invaders. The collapse stunned the German high command. Soldiers inside the pocket were shocked by starvation, freezing temperatures, and relentless Soviet attacks. Hitler ordered General Paulus to hold the city at all costs, refusing a retreat. The trapped soldiers, unprepared for the Soviet winter and running out of supplies, realized they were facing certain destruction. Across the world, observers were stunned that the seemingly unstoppable Wehrmacht was now crumbling inside a single city. By February 1943, the once feared German 6th Army surrendered. Nearly 90,000 survivors were taken prisoner, and only a fraction ever returned home. The brutal defeat marked a turning point in World War II, proving that Germany could be beaten. Stalingrad's fall shocked the Axis powers, inspired the Allies, and became a symbol of Soviet determination. The battle collapsed Hitler's dream of conquering the East and reshaped the course of the war forever. The Battle of Midway, 1942. In June 1942, the Japanese Navy sought to eliminate the United States as a Pacific power by luring its aircraft carriers into a trap near the small atoll of Midway. Confident after their rapid expansion across Asia, the Japanese expected an easy victory. What they did not know was that American codebreakers had deciphered their plans, giving Admiral Nimitz a decisive advantage. Midway became the stage for a confrontation that would shock naval warfare forever. The battle opened with fierce air attacks as waves of Japanese planes struck Midway Island. But American carriers Hornet, Enterprise, and Yorktown launched counterstrikes that changed history. In a matter of minutes, dive bombers struck the heart of the Japanese fleet, sinking 4 of its powerful aircraft carriers. The once mighty Japanese Navy, which had dominated the Pacific since Pearl Harbor, was suddenly caught unprepared and left in shock. Japanese commanders and pilots were stunned as flames consumed their vessels, realizing their naval supremacy had collapsed in a single day. For the first time, Japan faced the reality that its expansion could be halted. American sailors and aviators, though suffering heavy losses, saw Midway as a miracle of strategy and courage. News of the victory shocked both Axis and Allied nations alike, proving that the tide of war could turn in the Pacific. The consequences were brutal and decisive. With the loss of its carriers, Japan's ability to wage large-scale naval offensives collapsed permanently. Midway transformed the United States into the dominant naval power in the Pacific. The battle not only restored Allied confidence, but also stunned the world with its sudden reversal of fortune. Midway became a symbol of intelligence, preparation, and the power of a single decisive strike. D-Day, the Normandy invasion, 1944. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched the largest amphibious invasion in history, Operation Overlord. More than 150,000 soldiers from the United States, Britain, Canada, and other nations crossed the English Channel to storm the beaches of Normandy. The Germans expected an invasion, but were unprepared for the scale and ferocity of the assault. D-Day became one of the most shocking and decisive moments of World War II. At dawn, paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines while thousands of landing craft rushed toward the fortified beaches. Soldiers charged through machine gun fire, artillery shells, and obstacles designed to crush the invasion. Omaha Beach, in particular, turned into a brutal slaughter as American troops faced relentless fire. Yet against overwhelming odds, the Allies secured beachheads and began pushing inland. The courage and sacrifice stunned the world. German commanders were shocked by the Allied deception that convinced them the real attack would come at Calais. Hitler delayed releasing reinforcements, leaving frontline divisions to collapse under the pressure. Soldiers on both sides witnessed scenes of unimaginable destruction, with bodies scattered across the sand and villages reduced to ruins. Still, the Allies advanced, their determination unshaken. By nightfall, the Allies had secured a foothold in France. The invasion marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. D-Day shocked the Axis by proving that even the strongest fortifications could be overcome. The brutal yet successful landings inspired hope across occupied Europe and set the stage for the liberation of an entire continent. The Battle of El Alamein, 1942, in the deserts of North Africa, German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox, threatened to seize the Suez Canal and cut Allied supply routes. By October 1942, the situation looked grim for the Allies. But British General Bernard Montgomery launched a counteroffensive at El Alamein that would shock the Axis powers and turn the tide in North Africa. The battle began with a massive artillery barrage that lit up the desert sky. Allied tanks and infantry advanced against heavily fortified German-Italian positions. The fighting was brutal, with minefields, sandstorms, and endless exchanges of fire. Yet the Allies pressed forward with relentless determination, slowly breaking through Rommel's defenses. The scale of the offensive stunned even seasoned veterans. Rommel's forces, unprepared for the sustained Allied assault, began to collapse. German and Italian soldiers were shocked to find themselves outnumbered and outgunned in a theater where they once held the advantage. The defeat at El Alamein shattered the myth of Axis invincibility in the desert, sending shockwaves through Berlin and Rome. The victory boosted Allied morale across the world. Churchill declared, "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." The collapse of Axis forces in North Africa opened the door to the invasion of Italy and the eventual liberation of Southern Europe. El Alamein stood as a symbol of resilience, determination, and a shocking reversal of fortune. The Battle of Kursk, 1943. In July 1943, the German army launched Operation Citadel, their final attempt to regain initiative on the Eastern Front. The focus was the Kursk salient, a massive bulge in Soviet lines. Hitler believed a concentrated assault with thousands of tanks would overwhelm Soviet defenses. What he did not expect was that the Red Army had already anticipated the attack and prepared deep defensive networks that stretched for hundreds of miles. Kursk would soon become the largest tank battle in history. When the fighting erupted, the scale was unprecedented. More than 6,000 tanks clashed across fields filled with mines, trenches, and artillery. The Germans pushed forward with Tiger and Panther tanks, but Soviet T-34s swarmed them in relentless waves. Air battles raged above as both sides committed thousands of aircraft. Soldiers on both sides were stunned by the sheer intensity of the battle, where every advance cost thousands of lives. The climax came at Prokhorovka, where Soviet forces launched a massive counterattack against the elite SS Panzer divisions. In one day of brutal fighting, hundreds of tanks were destroyed in close combat. German soldiers were shocked to find that their technological superiority could not guarantee victory against Soviet numbers and determination. The failure of the German assault collapsed their hopes of regaining momentum in the East. In the aftermath, the Soviets launched a counteroffensive that drove the Germans back hundreds of miles. Kursk marked the end of large-scale German offensives on the Eastern Front. The battle shocked the Axis with its brutality and scale, while proving to the world that the Soviets now held the initiative. The collapse at Kursk sealed Germany's fate, as the Red Army would continue to push westward until Berlin itself fell. The Battle of the Bulge, 1944 to 1945. In December 1944, as Allied forces pushed toward Germany, Hitler launched one last desperate gamble. The Ardennes Offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, aimed to split Allied armies and recapture Antwerp. The Germans achieved total surprise, striking through the snowy forests of Belgium and Luxembourg. The sudden assault shocked the Allies, who were unprepared for such a bold move so late in the war. The offensive began with a massive artillery barrage and waves of panzers smashing into thinly held American lines. Entire units were overwhelmed, and towns like Bastogne became surrounded. Soldiers were caught in freezing conditions, short on supplies, and stunned by the ferocity of the attack. It seemed for a moment that the Allies might collapse, and panic spread as the German advance carved a deep bulge into the front lines. Yet the Allies regrouped. American paratroopers held Bastogne in a brutal siege, refusing to surrender despite being encircled. Reinforcements poured in, and Allied air power returned once the skies cleared. German forces, unprepared for prolonged fighting and running low on fuel, began to falter. Soldiers who had once believed in a surprise victory now faced brutal counterattacks. By January 1945, the German offensive had collapsed. The Battle of the Bulge cost the Axis tens of thousands of men and equipment they could not replace. For the Allies, it was a shocking reminder that the war was not yet over. But the failure exhausted Germany's last reserves, clearing the way for the Allied advance into the heart of the Reich. The Battle of Britain, 1940. In the summer of 1940, after the fall of France, Hitler turned his attention to Britain. Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion, depended on achieving air superiority. The Luftwaffe launched relentless bombing raids against British airfields, radar stations, and cities. The world watched as the small island nation stood alone against Nazi might. Few believed Britain could resist for long, but the outcome shocked even the most confident German planners. The Royal Air Force, though outnumbered, relied on radar technology and a network of fighter command that coordinated swift interceptions. Spitfires and Hurricanes rose daily to challenge waves of German bombers and fighters. Battles raged in the skies above London and southern England, leaving civilians stunned as dogfights unfolded over their homes. The Blitz brought destruction, but the British spirit refused to collapse. German commanders were shocked by the resilience of the RAF. Hitler expected Britain to surrender quickly, but losses mounted and the Luftwaffe failed to gain control of the skies. For the first time in the war, the unstoppable German war machine had been checked. Soldiers and civilians across the world were stunned that Britain had survived the onslaught. The victory was decisive. By October, Germany abandoned plans for invasion. The Battle of Britain marked the first major defeat for Hitler's forces and gave hope to the free world. Churchill famously declared, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." The shocking resilience of Britain became a symbol of defiance and turned the tide of global morale. The Battle of Okinawa, 1945. In April 1945, the United States launched the invasion of Okinawa, the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific. The island was critical as a staging ground for a future invasion of Japan itself. Japanese forces prepared a brutal defense, determined to make the cost unbearable. What followed was one of the bloodiest battles of the war, shocking the world with its scale and ferocity. American troops faced fierce resistance from caves, tunnels, and hidden fortifications. Kamikaze pilots launched devastating attacks on Allied ships, sinking dozens and damaging many more. On land, Japanese soldiers fought to the death, refusing to surrender. The brutality stunned American troops, who encountered entire civilian populations caught in the crossfire. The battle collapsed any illusions of an easy victory in the Pacific. As the fighting dragged on for nearly 3 months, the casualties mounted. More than 12,000 Americans were killed, while Japanese military and civilian deaths exceeded 100,000. Soldiers and commanders alike were shocked at the willingness of Japanese forces to sacrifice everything. The ferocity of Okinawa made it clear that an invasion of the Japanese mainland would be even more brutal. The consequences of Okinawa were profound. The shocking losses convinced American leaders that using the atomic bomb might be the only way to avoid even greater bloodshed. For Japan, the collapse of defenses at Okinawa marked the final stage of the war. The battle became a grim symbol of sacrifice, brutality, and the terrifying price of total war. The Battle of Berlin, 1945. In April 1945, Soviet forces encircled Berlin, the heart of Hitler's crumbling empire. The city became the final battleground of World War II in Europe. As the Red Army advanced, German civilians and soldiers alike faced unimaginable destruction. Hitler remained in his bunker, insisting that Berlin be defended to the last man. The siege that followed shocked the world with its brutality and desperation. Soviet artillery pounded the city relentlessly, reducing entire districts to rubble. Street fighting raged as German soldiers, Hitler Youth, and even civilians armed with rifles tried to resist. The collapse of German defenses was brutal and inevitable, but the defenders fought with a mixture of fear and fanaticism. The destruction left both sides stunned by the scale of suffering. Inside his bunker, Hitler raged at his commanders, refusing to accept defeat. When the Soviets reached the city center, he took his own life, leaving Germany leaderless. Soldiers were shocked to find their Führer gone, and resistance crumbled quickly. The fall of Berlin marked the ultimate collapse of the Third Reich. On May 2, 1945, Berlin surrendered. The shocking final battle left the city in ruins, with hundreds of thousands dead or displaced. For the world, Berlin symbolized both the brutality of total war and the end of Hitler's ambitions. The Soviet victory stunned observers and marked the definitive conclusion of the war in Europe. The Battle of Monte Cassino, 1944. In early 1944, the Allies faced the daunting task of breaking through the German Gustav Line in Italy. At its heart stood Monte Cassino, a historic monastery perched on a hilltop that dominated the surrounding valleys. German forces fortified the area, turning it into a near-impregnable stronghold. The battle that followed shocked soldiers and civilians alike with its devastation and destruction of cultural heritage. Allied forces launched multiple assaults, supported by heavy artillery and bombing raids. In February, American bombers reduced the monastery to rubble, believing it housed German defenders. The destruction shocked the world, as one of Europe's great landmarks was obliterated. Ironically, the ruins provided even stronger defensive positions for the Germans, turning the fight into a brutal stalemate. For months, soldiers from around the world, Americans, British, Poles, Indians, and others, battled in mud, ruins, and hills. The fighting was brutal and costly, with tens of thousands of casualties. German troops were shocked by the relentless Allied persistence, but they held firm until May, when a massive coordinated assault finally broke their defenses. The fall of Monte Cassino opened the road to Rome, but at a shocking price. The monastery lay in ruins, the countryside devastated, and the memory of the brutal struggle scarred all who fought there. The battle symbolized the collapse of illusions about quick victories in Italy and highlighted the brutal cost of breaking through entrenched German lines.